Welcome to Shared Lunch, brought to you by Sharesies. In today's episode of Shared Lunch, we're in Sydney with CEO of DroneShield, Oleg Vornik.
If a drone is today seen around an airport, you have to shut down all flights, so no flights taking off, no flights landing, and that's a huge disruption. But that's actually not the worst scenario. We are the only public listed counter-drone company in the world, so there are plenty of listed drone companies, but if you want to have exposure to counter-drone, there's really not a lot of options. Over time, I think the civilian sector will become probably half of our revenue. So if you think about drones disrupting airports, conducting cyber threats, because a drone can really be seen as a surveillance platform and an attack platform.
Investing involves risk. You might lose the money you start with. We recommend talking to a licensed financial advisor. We also recommend reading product disclosure documents before deciding to invest. Everything you're about to see and hear is current at the time of recording.
Before we get started, I want to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land, water and sky from where we're filming today, and pay respects to elders past and present. Hi there, Oleg, and welcome to the show. I want to start a bit about your background, because you have a really interesting backstory, right? Can you tell me a little bit about how you came to be the CEO of DroneShield?
So I came to New Zealand as a teen with my mum. We were escaping Russia just as Putin was just coming to power, and my mum didn't want me to be in Chechnya, what it would have been at the time, or Ukraine as of now with a compulsory military conscription. And so we ended up in New Zealand because basically that's one country that would take us as part of the skilled migrant program. We lived in social housing in New Zealand. And so when I was going through my maths degree, because it just happened to like maths, I was like, oh man, like I need to get out of my social housing situation. And so finance and investment banking seemed like the thing to do for that. So I ended up doing an economics add-on to my maths degree, and first became a trade and then a banker. But after about 10 years as a banker, I kind of started to question why I was doing the all-nighters and the hours and the intensity involved. And so just around that time, I was introduced to these two American defense scientists who had the idea of a drone detection business. I was the first employee. And we listed the business in mid-2016 on 20 million valuation, raised $7 million. And then I went to the US for a couple of years. And yeah, the rest is history.
I'm interested to understand why DroneShield. What was it about the business all those years ago that excited you?
So interestingly, it was actually the fund that connected me with the two engineers. So what I find is that ultimately it's not even so much the organizations that you're part of, but people inside of those organizations that you trust. And so I knew the guy was running the New York fund who originally came across the two engineers and connected me with them, and the fund became our largest shareholder for the first several years. And so just the idea of having them as my largest shareholder, and I actually really respected the guy who was running it, really gave me a lot of confidence, because when you're in these situations, kind of early stage startups, you really need to have a high degree of trust. So that was the thing for me.
DroneShield has come into focus a lot in recent months, but this is by no means an overnight success, right? The business was founded in 2014 and listed in 2016. Can you tell us what is the premise behind DroneShield? What does DroneShield actually do?
DroneShield does detection and takedown of small drones used in nefarious applications. So, for example, we have hundreds of systems deployed in Ukraine, sensing and taking down Russian drones when they're attacking Ukrainian civilian or military targets. But really, we're deployed in about 50 countries around the world. So the US has been our largest customer across the Department of Defense, Homeland Security agencies, law enforcement, intelligence. But also over time, I think the civilian sector will become probably half of our revenue. So if you think about drones disrupting airports, conducting cyber threats to data centers, creating energy infrastructure threats, because a drone can really be seen as a surveillance platform and an attack platform, as well as a cyber attack platform. So we are protecting sensitive assets against small drones doing all of those activities. And it's a hardware and a software business. So what you're seeing is basically handheld, vehicle-based and fixed-site families of solutions. So hardware, but with software that we regularly update on a quarterly basis. So that's the SaaS revenue part of the business. And that gets deployed across thousands of products out in the field.
You mentioned about your government customers. I'm interested to know a little bit more about these. I imagine that when you're speaking to these customers and trying to negotiate a deal, it's quite tricky, right? But once you consummate those deals, you would expect that they're quite sticky, right? So can you tell me a bit more about these customers and how you see the opportunity with some of them going forward?
Selling to military has quite a large degree of obscurity, and a lot of it is deliberate. You can't, for example, Google, how do I sell counter-drone to the US Department of Defense, and out comes a little email and a phone number. You just call them and, hey, I have some products to sell. So it's a multi-year process to set it correctly, especially for nascent products, right? So first time we front a lot of these customers, they're like, small drones are toys, that's what I buy kids for Christmas, why do I bother? But advantage of being early was that just as our customers started to look at counter drone solutions, we were there and developed those relationships over time. And like you said, Jackie, unlike the selling to the consumer space, selling to the governments is very much a long-term trust game. So you build that relationship and then customers respond by giving you a lot of feedback. So you build your tech roadmap in accordance to what the customer says. Here are the things I'm looking for. Here's the data from your own sensor. So use that to make better products. And then customers respond by buying more of your products. So once you're in, you're really deeply embedded. Now, customers usually try to deal with 2 or 3 suppliers for any one particular thing just to have some redundancy. But that trusted relationship set with suppliers globally is really important. And also what often happens to a lot of our customers, we say we'll be their second counter drone company, in the sense that the first ones would usually be very kind of snake oil. They'll say, hey, our products can do this, this, and this. And customers look at that and they end up buying maybe a few and they're like, oh, this product just doesn't work. So then they end up often turning to DroneShield. And it's like, okay, now finally the product actually does what we are looking to do. But also for a lot of customers, we have deployed from the very, very early days, and they're still continuing to buy. Probably 90% of our solutions, our sales are to repeat customers. So I guess in terms of the future, we say now we're deployed in about 50 countries around the world, and gradually our customers are buying more. So the market saturation is really small. So if you think about the militaries, they only really started in mass looking at procurement maybe 3 years ago, since the start of the Ukraine war. And now they're saying, okay, well, future of conflict will be drones and counter-drone solutions, and we have very little of it. So we have to buy quite a bit. And the civilian sector is basically zero market saturation. So no airport around the world, unfortunately, has a fully deployed counter-drone system. So all of that wave of acquisitions is still coming.
What are the key products that you have? What do they do? How are they different to what else is on the market?
So radio frequency is the key technology we use. So drone communicates its location and what it sees with its camera to the end user, and then user sends to the drone where to go. And we can listen to that traffic in terms of both-way communication and triangulate real-time location of the drone, and often also location of the pilot. So these are the core technologies: RF, radio frequency, for detection and defeat, but also we add secondary modalities. So you think of radars, cameras, acoustics. We actually started 10, 11 years ago as an acoustics-based business before we moved to radio frequency. And then for the defeat, you can have things like cyber. So we've added that as a secondary technology. High-powered microwaves, which basically like a real-life version of Matrix. So you fry circuits in any electronic item that moves towards you like a drone. And so we do integration of all of that. So we're both a product maker as well as integrator of third-party technologies in a multi-sensor solution. And on that, a lot of people say, well, what about fiber optic drones and AI control drones? And what we're finding is that RF is very much a backbone of the drone communications, drone connection. And for those unusual situations, that's when our secondary modalities like radars or high-powered microwave would kick in.
Very sophisticated hardware and software, and can do a lot of damage to drones. Are these harmful at all to humans?
So everything we do is completely harmless to humans. So it works on drones by basically confusing them, with one exception of high-powered microwave where you fry the circuit, but even that is harmless to humans. So that's a deliberate strategy. So one, we're finding that if you're doing a kinetic solution like bullets or missiles, it's either not cost symmetric. So the problem with drones, it's cost asymmetry game. So you're thinking of a $200 drone, a $5 million tank. If you start, and it can blow up a $5 million tank. Now, if you start shooting $50,000 missiles at $200 drones, you will very quickly run out of $50,000 missiles. And then if you're thinking of bullets, the problem is in a lot of settings, it's just not practical. So firstly, in Ukraine, drones often go very high and then dive down on targets. So very hard to actually shoot at, especially for objects which are dinner plate size, moving 100 kilometers an hour. And then you imagine a swarm of them coming from different directions. So very, very difficult. But then besides, in a lot of situations, you can't physically shoot down a drone. You imagine here in Sydney, you have the Navy Garden Island base. I can assure you they will not be using machine guns in the middle of Sydney Harbour for just about any situation, right? And you think about the civilian sector like stadiums, airports. So having products which are completely harmless for humans is really important for mass adoption, which is what DroneShield does.
I'm interested to understand how you use AI in your technology, and then also related to that, how you work with your customers in terms of getting data that supports the software.
We realized about 5 years ago that counter-drone is going to be an AI game because drones started to develop exponentially. So back when we started, there might have been maybe 5 common drone models. Now you have unlimited amount of drone protocols that's essentially coming on market. So in the early days, we had a manual, like call it radio frequency fingerprint library type approach, where in the radio frequency domain, you're saying, right, a drone sounds a bit like this, I match it against a known signature, and if there's a match, it's an alert. But the problem is you need now to have a sensor recognizing, the software recognizing a drone that it has never seen before. And for that, AI serves pretty well. But the problem with AI is writing algorithms is the relatively simple part. The hard part is maintaining enormous databases for the AI engines to train on. So 5 years ago, we started basically collecting what is now the largest drone signal library of its kind in the world. So drone signals in Japan and US, Europe, Ukraine, Australia, and so on. And now we have thousands of devices out there in the field, including very large number that with customers' consent actually remit the data from the sensors back to us every time the customer connects those sensors to the internet, which means our data engineering teams can then update our data sets, look for edge cases, and the algorithm becomes smarter. Now, what we're super excited about is what we're looking to do to the AI engine next year. People think of AI as large language models, basically ChatGPT. But in the military setting, you can't connect to the cloud all the time. You need to be completely what's in your hands. So we call it micro AI. So we develop hardware and software for AI to specifically work on tiny devices in the palm of your hand. And now you're making that fully self-learn as you go. That means that even if drone technology evolves literally on a daily basis, the device will learn with it.
You've spoken about some of your government clients, but there's very broad application for your products, right? And there's a civilian or commercial market for your products across airports, etc. Can you talk to me a bit about what this opportunity is with these types of clients and how you see that going forward?
So drones can easily disrupt airports, as we're now seeing in Europe with lots of drone flights around Scandinavia and other areas, because if a drone gets ingested into the engine of a plane, you will likely blow out the engine and with it potentially down the whole airline, and not to talk about even cracking of windscreen of the airplanes or damaging the body, the fuselage of the airplane. And so with it, if a drone is today seen around an airport, you have to shut down all flights, so no flights taking off, no flights landing, and that's a huge disruption. But that's actually not the worst scenario. The worst scenario is if you actually have the aircraft coming down because of the drone strike. So if you think about now data centers, drones land on the roofs of data centers and use proximity to hack into the data center networks, conduct cyber attacks. We have seen energy infrastructure getting attacked by drones. So you think of oil wells, for example, highly flammable situation. Now a drone can create a lot of damage in those scenarios. So whether it's an activist or a terrorist or even a child, it doesn't really matter. You're trying to keep all these drones away from your energy infrastructure. And there's a lot of other scenarios, stadiums with potential terrorism attacks or even sports teams using drones to film events and go around the TV presenter rights and so on. So there's a huge amount, and we think it's about US $30 billion total addressable market in the civilian space on top of roughly $30 billion TAM in the military space.
So significant market opportunity, right? But I guess the market for counter drone solutions is still somewhat nascent, although that's evolving. How do you see the competitive landscape? And what would you say, you've alluded to some of it, but what would you say are your key points of difference?
We have unique technical and commercial differentiators. On the technical front, we're there just before anybody else, 10, 11 years ago, and we, throughout the whole time, had the largest engineering team in the market. deliberately looking at counter-drone technology. So when other people had 5 engineers, we had 15. When others had 15, we had 50. Today we have over 300 engineers here in Sydney working full-time on the counter-drone solution. And we have really high agility culture. And Australia makes great engineers. If you think of both software, so your Atlassians and Canvas, or even hardware, if you think about medtech, medical technology devices, Australia has great reputation with that. So you think about Cochlear, you think about Rode microphones. And so we're drawing on all the talent. We import talent. So Sydney is a great place to bring talent from overseas. One of our competitors is a Danish company that is literally in the Arctic Circle. Now, why in your own mind would anybody come to Arctic Circle unless you're there to work? So Sydney is a great place to actually host talent as well. So we're quite proud of the engineering team we've assembled. So as a result, we're able to detect further, defeat further, be more effective. Products meet other customer technical requirements. We talked about the largest AI data set that anybody has, which basically means we're even more effective than others. When it comes to commercial differentiators, so it's those trusted relationships with end customers. So we've been there for years. Our products were doing what it says in the tin, and customers often in the military space form those deep trusted relationships, and they give you information, their requirements. And most of our sales, contrary to what people think, are not actually tendered. So when you work in the national security reasons, you often have sole source to your sales, because otherwise if you tender, you have to reveal your specifications. Like you think you're putting out a tender and saying, okay, I want to detect a drone 5 kilometers away. If you have, for example, American military base, so Chinese would be, right, if I can do a drone that can do surveillance from 6 kilometers, then I'll be fine. So because of that, customers tend to do sole source awards. And so because of that, we tend to be really well placed usually.
With the customers that you're speaking to, how much knowledge do you think that they have of the importance of your products? Is there much of an education process?
In the beginning, it was quite a lot of education, which also contributed to pretty long sales cycles. So maybe 5-7 years ago, it could be up to 2 years from the first handshake to a sale. And a lot of it was driven by explaining to customers what a counter-drone system can do. But now, thankfully, customer knowledge gets much better because most of our customers are repeat purchases and they're just buying more of the same because they have such low level of deployment. And so because of that, we're finding that, yes, you still need to do some training and the technology evolves all the time as well, but you're not starting from zero, which really helps to shorten sales cycles and generally just for us to conduct sales to audiences who already understand. So this is in the military market. Civilian market is probably one step behind in the sense that they're a bit earlier to the adoption cycle. So they're still learning. But the good thing, if you can sell to the military, the performance criteria for the civilian sector are usually lower. Now, the price points often also tend to be lower, although not for airports or data centers who are usually pretty well funded. If you now look at stadiums, at prisons especially are very, very tight with funding, but they have really huge drone problems. So you think about drones delivering drugs, weapons, cigarettes, escape kits right to prison windows, Amazon style. We say, look, don't even bring the drone down. We'll tell you where the pilot is. Go and arrest the pilot. That's probably a better solution for you. So things like that.
Across those alternative commercial areas, where are you seeing the biggest opportunity at the moment? Is it with stadiums? Is it prisons? Is it airports?
Data centers and airports. They're probably two of our biggest customer sets right now, and they're fairly centralized. So there are only a few really big names in the data centers globally. And also airports tend to be fairly centralized. So for example, in the US, every airport, unlike in Australia, is actually government owned, and they take very strict guidance from FAA in the US, which is the agency regulating the air traffic safety. So once FAA finally issues recommendation to deploy counter-drone systems, and we think there's going to be a few systems being recommended, we think that we'll really commence deployment at very large scale. And similarly elsewhere around the world, we spend a lot of time talking to regulators saying, hey, here is, speaking of education, here is the realm of possible. You really need to have all the airports in your domain having counter-drone systems, and then the regulators talk to the airports.
You mentioned the regulatory environment, quite sophisticated and complex as you look across different jurisdictions. Multiple government agencies regulate airspace. How do you go about navigating some of the challenges there?
There are multiple regulations, like for example, airspace, who owns the airspace. So for example, just because Qantas aircraft might be flying over your house every morning, you can't get just a nod and shoot it down. So drone is technically enjoying the same privilege, right? So what it practically means is detection usually has a lot greater ability in terms of everybody being able to sense drones, but then when it comes to the defeat, it really becomes domain of government agencies to take down the drones, which is still a very large market for us. So if you think about the militaries, law enforcement, intelligence, homeland security, but even for customers that cannot, like for example state and local law enforcement in the US, and by the way that legislation is changing to enable them, we think soon, to defeat drones as well, we can indicate often location of the pilot to them, which would still be legal for them, and then they'll go and apprehend the pilot. So you kind of work around it, and a lot of your job is also educating the customers legally on what they can or cannot do too. Airports often would have law enforcement officers as part of airport security, so even if airport itself cannot take down drones, Australian Federal Police being inside of Sydney Airport will be able to.
We've seen a number of announcements recently in terms of investments in R&D facilities in South Australia and Virginia. Can you talk to me a bit more about what your plans are there and how that will transform your ability to scale and service your customers?
We operate in about 50 countries around the world. So that means we want to both capture talent on a global basis. So Adelaide is well recognized as Australia's capital of electronic warfare, and a lot of Australian defense companies are based in Adelaide. So we've been historically taking people from Adelaide and moving them to Sydney, and today they form part of our Sydney engineering team. But also we feel that our new office will be able to capture a lot of additional talent to feed into our overall engineering solution. Now, when it comes to manufacturing, we have a number of initiatives. So today we're moving from 500 million annual production capacity, so $500 million a year, to about 2.4 billion by end of next year, so about 5x increase, and that's through significant expansion in Sydney. So we're moving from current 400 square meter space to 3,000 square meter facility. Our two contract manufacturers are expanding, as well as new contract manufacturers, one in the US and one in Europe, and that will assist with localizing. So a lot of our customers are saying, hey, like for example in Europe, we have all these programs, but they require 65% local content. And so having a European contract manufacturer achieves that to Australian IP. And then similarly in the US, you can really do much more if you can say, hey, it's American jobs and American made. And so that's what we're seeking to do.
You mentioned the use of contract manufacturing. What would you say are the advantages of using that? And do you foresee that that might change as the business grows and evolves?
So we do both our own manufacturing as well as contract manufacturing. So advantages of contract manufacturing is these are people who are highly experienced in large volume game. Our experience is in rapid innovation, which have fairly different skill sets. And also contract manufacturers tend to operate on fairly modest margins, so under 10%, while we as a business operate on roughly 65% gross profit margin. So more of your own manufacturing you do, more essentially you're reducing your overall blended gross margin, which is not what our investors would like to see. But also importantly, underneath both our for, call it like heavy grade industrial stuff. So metal fabrication, plastics injection molding, CNC machining, and so on. And a lot of these companies have really grown with us. We love working with them. We normally try to have 2 or 3 supplies for every part. And bill of materials, so you're basically baking a recipe for every product, is normally about 200 line items. And so we go to these 50 manufacturers for a lot of these line items, and then they're the ones investing into heavy capex and getting better in the process, and then servicing other customers, not just DroneShield. Even for a lot of them, we might be a significant customer and driving local jobs.
So you've had a record-breaking first half of 2025. Significant improvement across all key financial metrics versus the prior corresponding period. Can you talk me through some of the financial results?
So firstly, we're now profitable, and our aim is to continue being consistently operating cash flow profitable and cash flow positive going forward. And that revenue is very much underpinned by not just geopolitics, what you're seeing in the news, because often larger orders are not necessarily reactions to what's been happening at airports or military bases the previous week, but processes that go for months that eventuate with very large orders in tens of millions and hopefully some in hundreds of millions of dollars. So our customers are looking for mass deployment of counter-drone equipment. So they've been looking at this problem now for about 3 years since the start of the Ukraine war, and a lot of them now have limited amount of equipment. They're saying, right, now time for mass deployment, and DroneShield is really well positioned on the global stage in terms of us versus some of our competitors, and we talked about the differentiators. And we don't really compete much with defense primes because they tend to find counter drone with its rapid innovation is not really their game. Most of our competitors tend to be mid-tier private equity backed roll-ups, and so we find that we are pretty confident with our market share as our customers are starting to really go into mass procurement.
Can you talk me through those sort of early years as a listed company and how you've evolved, how the business has evolved since then?
In 9 years, we've gone from 25 million market cap to ASX 200 as we stand today. And in the early years, the issue was you essentially always come raise because you're making no revenue to speak of. You need to have heavy investment in R&D, and you might have cash flow runway maybe for another 6 months. That's pretty stressful. If you can go through years of having 3 to 6 months of cash in the bank, whatever happens to you afterwards is not really that stressful, right? And then as you scale up, you're still very much a retail business, because when you are a tiny company, institutions don't tend to invest because there's not enough liquidity for them to get in or get out. And even if institutions participate as part of your capital raises, they often tend to leave within the first couple of months of participating in the placement. So for us, the game was, how do you make the register more institutional? We're now seeing there's a lot of not just Australian but also international investors, and we're squarely on their radar because we're now large enough, liquid enough, and we are the only public listed counter-drone company in the world. So there are plenty of listed drone companies, but if you want to have exposure to counter-drone, there's really not a lot of options to go to, and it's super exciting. So I was in London, for example, for DSCI, the largest defense show in the world, about a month ago, and we met with a number of UK fund managers, and they've been exposed to our story for the very first time, and they absolutely loved it. But even 12 months ago, would have been too small, too liquid for a lot of them. So we're now in this virtuous cycle where finally we're becoming investable by a lot of very large funds.
That's right. Certainly the inclusion into the ASX 200 indice with the September quarterly rebalance has put you on the radar of, a lot of big fund managers.
That's right. Yeah. So we've gone from ASX 300 to 200 in the space of 12 months, and now scaling to see how quickly we can get to hopefully ASX 100.
So if we think about the drones that your products are taking down, what's the dynamic with the drone manufacturers, do you think? And I suppose you're watching each other quite carefully in terms of how the technology is evolving. What's your experience been there?
I remember we're at this defense show, which is how you really meet a lot of the industry, and the Autel CEO, Autel being one of two main Chinese drone makers, came to our stand, and they're like, DroneShield, we're really closely watching you. So it's very much a cat and mouse game where drone manufacturers, maybe 5-10 years ago, were prioritizing how do you make your drone fly the furthest and not crash into trees and carry the most payload, have the best camera. Now it's all of that plus how do you avoid DroneShield? So for that, they are looking at really sophisticated techniques, and it's pretty astounding. So you can buy a $20,000 Autel drone off the shelf, and $20,000 may sound like quite a lot, but in the military domain, it's actually not that much. And it would have electronic warfare communication techniques inside of it that 5 years ago would be classified military secret, which is insane. And now you can buy this as a family drone. And the reason they do this is because they are basically thinking, well, this is going to be deployed in the war zone eventually, and this needs to have hardened techniques to avoid detection and defeat. And for us, this is great. I mean, we want the Chinese and the Russians and Iranians to keep innovating, because if drone manufacturers would stop innovating, then the whole industry would just collapse. Our gross margins would collapse. And so we want to stay in front of everybody else by the nature of drones themselves innovating. But it's a bit like a fence. People can climb over fences, can holster fences, but you still build them because that takes care of most of your threats. So we're better than any other counter-drone company, and we'll continue getting better. So software updates every 3 months, hardware refreshes every 3 to 4 years, huge engineering team, being really agile and so on. So we said to drone manufacturers, yeah, let's do this. We love this competition.
So you just keep redesigning the fence, I suppose.
That's right. They knew a defense technology sector. Yes.
What would you say your definition of success looks like for DroneShield? Is there an ambition or a milestone in mind where when you achieve that, you'll be able to reflect and say, we've done it, we've made it?
Well, success for us has been a journey, right? So over time, when we're a 10-person company, with only 6 months cash runway. Success was just to survive for the next 12 months. Now, we just had our largest contract yet, the $62 million contract with the European Defense Ministry earlier in the year, and we've delivered it in record time within about 2 months. So the next bracket of size would be in hundreds of millions of dollars, and we have opportunities in our pipeline matching that we're actively working on. There are new generations of technology. We talked about the operations scaling, so opening our outsourced factories in the US and Europe, expanding in Australia. Fundamentally, I think about the business as sales, tech, and operations. So each one has its own milestones, and then there's overall operational milestone as the organization marshals forward. How do you make sure that in a company, not just top 10% of the employees contribute, but all 400 are humming along and contributing at their max productivity? How do you keep your workforce engaged? So all of these things are measures of success for us.
Thank you, Oleg, for joining us, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Pleasure.